Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
So we're going to start off this segment because we're proud of our local guys, and the Pacers won the first game in the finals. Did you watch the game?
I did.
What do you think of the Pacers?
I love the Pacers. They're the only team I follow.
Would you remember when you really became a fan? When you started maybe going to games, like how long ago it was?
The 1940s.
The 40s.
It was,
Market Square Arena.
Market Square Arena didn't exist.
Where
played,
was it?
It wasn't the Pacers. I shouldn't say that.
Okay.
I started watching
Basketball.
Pro basketball. I lived in Fort Wayne, and I watched what was now the Detroit Pistons, but was Fort Wayne Pistons in the 40s. And I followed with some interruptions, like 3 years in the Army. I have followed pro basketball pretty much all my adult life.
And you played basketball too when you were young, a little bit?
Little bit, but not.
So never for the high school team,
No.
just kind of with friends.
Yeah.
So when and the Pacers, do you remember when you first saw the Pacers play? Like,
I don't. I used to see them when they were in the American Basketball Association, and that's some time back. I don't remember exactly how far.
so have you watched the series leading up to the finals this year?
Yep, every game.
Every single game.
Yep.
So what do you think? How do you think they've been doing? Obviously, we've been winning, but do you have any critiques or anything?
I think they're a great team. I think they have a great coach.
Isn't it ironic? He used to coach here 20 years ago, and
Yeah. Well, I used to go to the games when he was the coach.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think he came here. He had been coaching Detroit, as I recall. And he brought them to the edge of, winning the whole thing. And then they, I don't think they ever won the championship, but he did very well. And he came here, and he was here for a few years, not many. Then he went to Dallas.
Right.
And he actually won the championship once down there. So, and he's a good coach.
So what do you think it takes to be a great coach? You obviously had to coach a lot of clients, being an attorney, to not do certain things or to do certain things. What do you think it takes to be a good coach and a good advisor?
Trust. Person has to trust you. They trust Carlisle. That team does. Those players are good players. They're great players. Everybody in the NBA almost is. But they trust his teaching.
Mm-hmm. And you've seen Indianapolis be successful with the Colts. You've seen Indianapolis go through a lot of changes with sports.
Yeah.
What are in the 500? Obviously, what are maybe some major moments in sports that you remember happening in Indianapolis, or that really stick out to you?
In the 500,
Mm-hmm.
I remember the race where there were 17 cars cracked up on the first lap.
When was that?
I don't know, but my son was about 7 or 8 years old.
Okay.
And all I remember is I put my hands over his eyes. And I was amazed that there were not people killed.
Right.
Because, were you there?
I doubt it. I might have been.
Oh, you would remember it if you were. Yeah, it was, let's say he was 8, maybe, around that. That would have been 1967, around that.
Okay. So, I mean, you're with Glick for how many years with property? How long were you with Glick? How many years was that?
I'm still there.
You're still, okay. All right. So started 40 years ago, like about
I went in the Army in 1956. Got out in 59. But in the spring of 59, I came to Indianapolis and had three interviews, maybe. Anyway, one of them was with a firm called Bamberger and Feibelman. And they offered me a job, and I took it. And they had Glick as a client.
Okay.
And so sometime in the fall of September, in September of 59, I came home from the Army and went to work, and one of the clients was Glick.
Okay. So my questions are, seen Indianapolis grow. Seen Indianapolis grow in sports, seen Indianapolis grow in industry, seen Indianapolis grow in conventions. Number one, were you instrumental in what aspects of growth, and what are some major benchmarks that you remember? And from your point of view, like what are some of the major benchmarks of growth? Could be with sports, 500, just what are kind of the chronological growth marks that you remember with Indianapolis?
I got involved in political life. I got out of the Army in September, and I worked at the polls in November of 1959. I don't think I was eligible. I may have been eligible to vote because I'd been here maybe 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I met some people at the polls that time. They lived in the neighborhood, of course, where I lived, and I had read a book by the author of South Pacific, James, what was his name, Mishner? He wrote another book called The Source, which was about Israel. He was very famous. I think mainly because South Pacific, the musical, was based upon his book. And while I was in the Army, I had read the Wall Street Journal every day. And I saw an article in the journal, saw more than one, obviously, but I saw a couple that I actually acted on. And one of them was this author turned out to be a Democrat, and he was from, I believe, Pennsylvania. And he had started a neighborhood Democratic Club and turned that area into, immediately around him, into a pretty productive place for Democrats. I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe I'll try that when I get home from the Army. So I did. After I met these folks at the polls on Election Day in '59, I decided to start a Democratic club.
What was the name of the club?
I think Devington. I'm not possible. Anyway, and I asked the precinct committeeman was a guy named Ted Watts. The vice committeeman was a woman named Loretta Rakes, and I asked that one of the proper things of protocol is you check with your precinct committeeman first before you start organizing in that precinct. Well, anyway, I did. I told them I would do the work, and we could set up and create it in our precinct. It was a big precinct out on the northeast side of Indianapolis, and lots of young families. So we created a Democratic club.
Now, how did you determine who was involved in the club and what was the things that you would try to accomplish when you would meet?
Well, I don't recall we had any rules except that if somebody said there was a Democrat, take them at their word. Hard enough to find them. And our goal, which we achieved in that precinct, although it was a very large precinct, about 1,200 voters in the precinct.
What geographically, where was it in Fishers? Or where?
It was everything between Emerson and Arlington.
Okay.
42nd Street to 38th Street, north to south. Yeah. That's a big territory, but in parts of it were still raw land back then. But there were about 1,200 voters in the...
So how many people would meet at each meeting? How many would come to the meetings out of the 1,200?
We probably got up to as many as 25.
Okay.
I'd say that's about it.
And what was their structure as far as what you're always trying to accomplish in discussions, or?
No.
What were some of the first initiatives you guys you remember that you were trying to work through?
Find out who was there in the precinct.
Okay.
And secondly, our objective was simply to help the precinct committeeman get the vote, get people to vote.
Get people to vote.
And we were, for that precinct, we were pretty successful.
So how far out would they canvass?
You can't replicate that.
Well, they had to canvass outside just that precinct, right? You'd have people going hitting doors?
Not people, me. I polled the precinct, the entire precinct.
You knocked on every door.
Every door. Must have been the summer of maybe 62.
Okay.
And so we had a pretty good idea who was there. In addition, it's easy to tell if they're already registered, but if they're not, you got a house, you got people in it. Who are they? What are they doing there? And anyway, I took off my vacation one summer and I pulled the whole precinct. Knocked on every door, and so we had a better idea.
So what were some of the reactions when you would just go up and knock on people's door? What were some of those situations that kind of stand out?
It's hard to believe today, but a lot of the women said, I have to ask my husband. When I asked them to identify Republican or Democrat.
Well, I mean, it was a little bit more structured like that as a household instead of as much of independence.
Oh, that was very common at that time.
What were some of the issues that were on the table in general that at that time that were worrisome or people were trying to get on one side or the other? What were some of the major issues locally and maybe even nationally at that time?
We were in the club. We were not very interested in local politics. We were very interested in national politics. So the issues were, there was a lot of anti-democratic feeling about Kennedy. Some of it was because he was Catholic. People like Goldwater were emerging on the right. I had had a little, not so much experience, but knowledge about him because I had been in Arizona for 3 years and he was a senator from there. And anyway, we were very young, pro-Kennedy.
What were some of the major issues that were going on right then?
Don't remember.
Is it like national big things
Well,
in the early 60s?
yeah, but not things that we could affect.
Right. But the chatter, like what was the chatter about? Was it just women's rights, human rights?
Bombs.
Atomic bombs?
I just recently watched a movie called Dr. Strangelove. Have you ever seen it?
I've heard of it, and I think I saw it a long time ago, but I can't really recall the details.
It's about a general who controls an air base, and he sends one of his planes, which is nuclear armed, to he decides to attack Russia. And the movie is a parody, but it's got wonderful actors in it. Peter Sellers plays, a British actor, plays 3 different parts. And they're very, very different parts. He plays the President of the United States, plays a British attaché to the general, and he plays a plays Henry Kissinger, basically, a character based on Henry Kissinger. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
And the movie is he decides to attack the president and the head of Russia. They're all trying to stop this plane from going, but ultimately they fail.
So do you remember, like, when Kennedy was coming up into power, and then he gets elected president? I've heard some things about possibly that the mob wasn't very happy with some of the things that he was pushing for. What do you think are some of the reasons that he was assassinated? What do you think the underlying, kind of behind the scenes, just things you've heard or just going with your gut? What do you think those reasons were?
I'm familiar with those rumors, but nobody knows. And there is no hard evidence that it was Lee Harvey Oswald. No, he did the killing. Nobody ever, to my recollection, connected him with the mob. So I think it's just like most assassination attempts. There are people that are angry, controlled anger,
Right.
mental illness.
So in the let's say the 60s, were you not just a Democrat holding a group and growing a group? Did you start getting involved politically and wanting to run for things? Like, what was the path to wanting to be more involved than just polling a neighborhood? What were those kind of benchmarks that grew?
The guy that I mentioned before, Ted Watts, moved out of the precinct, so I ran for precinct committeeman. In the process, I met quite a few people, and I don't remember the exact dates. It's kind of fuzzy, but I met a guy named Andrew Jacobs Jr. Andy and I became friends. He ran for Congress in '62. Same year I ran just for precinct committeeman. And on a winter day, I do remember that, I was downtown waiting for I used to take the bus to work and back. He pulled over and offered me a ride. And I've often said since it was a 40-year ride. Because that was just by chance. Down on Delaware Street. And he drove me home. I don't think he realized how far away I lived, but he did it. And next day, he deliberately came by and picked me up. And he started giving me a ride every day. And he had seen me when I was running for precinct committeeman, and that's why he stopped because he saw me. And we didn't know each other.
And you were how old? How old were you at this point? What's a guess?
27.
Okay.
27 or 28. Anyway, things happened, and I did things just to help him. And By the spring of 1963, I had become fairly well acquainted with a large part of the North Side Democrats, well beyond the precinct. I mean, across the whole North Side. And in this fellow named John Martin got nominated for mayor. And a fight broke out, not involving me. And disagreements over who is going to work in his campaign. We had a county chairman, a guy named Judson Haggerty, who was rather charismatic sort of guy, and I was rather taken with him also, and wanted to support him anyway. What happened? These folks, different factions of the local party were sort of struggling to see who was going to be close to John Martin, who was mayor. And the reason he was, a candidate for mayor, but the reason he was a candidate for mayor was that the party couldn't agree on anybody. And Matt Welch, who was the governor at the time, just stepped in and said, "Here's your candidate, period. Get on with it." And but then, even after Matt did that, they couldn't get together. And finally, somebody, a guy named Al Adelson, proposed me as a compromise candidate to run the campaign.
Okay.
And I undertook the job.
So what was the populace that campaign was going to?
Pardon?
The populace that campaign was targeting, how many people?
Well, by that time, we were past the primary. I didn't have anything to do with the primary, I don't believe. Some of this stuff I could be off in terms of timing in particular.
Sure.
Because it's just too far back. But anyway, that summer of 1963, I spent, instead of practicing law, I spent running the campaign to make John Martin mayor. And fact is, he got elected.
So who was the current mayor at that time?
Pardon?
Who was the current mayor at that time that he was taking over?
We had a mayor named Charles Boswell. Charlie had run there had been a fight over who was to be the county chairman. Charlie ran for that, and he became the county chairman. And when he did, he also resigned as mayor. He wanted to run for the Senate. That all happened in '62. And he ran, but he lost, and a guy named Birch Bayh became the U.S. nominee for senator, and he ultimately won. Anyway, the party was all roiled up, all the people coming and going. And the guy I mentioned before, the charismatic guy, Judson Haggerty, he ran against Boswell for chairman. He got beat, but then Boswell resigned, and he ran again, and he won. I don't recall who he ran against. And maybe no one. In any event, he became the chairman, and I helped him.
So explain what you had to do to run a campaign. What goes into that?
Well,
what are the puzzle
it's very
pieces
different
of
running
that?
a campaign for a nomination, especially if you don't have a primary. And it's very different running a campaign for election as a party leader as distinguished from running for office, for a regular public office. Anyway, and I was just helping him. I called people and tried to persuade them.
So it was phone work?
I
Majority of it was
organized
phone?
Pardon?
Call center phone work, essentially?
Uh,
Not call
good bit
center,
of
but
it
you'd have
was.
volunteers calling.
But also, I had a little knack for organization, I guess. He didn't. So being charismatic doesn't make you an organizer. So I was the organizer and he was the personality. And he got elected. And turned out he was really pretty paranoid. And there were only 2 people in town he trusted. I was one of them. So later on, I got to stop and think about some of this. I haven't thought about this for 50 years.
Right. Yeah.
And so summer of '63 came along, and I was picked to try and organize the mayor's campaign.
And who was that?
Pardon?
Who was that?
Well, that was John Barton.
Okay.
Barton was running because, the governor said, "You guys are so messed up, I'm going to pick your candidate. And I'm tired of waiting." And he picked John Barton, who was superintendent of state police at the time. Made a good candidate on paper, and he was okay. John was. And so he was a candidate. I was running the headquarters out of one of the abandoned hotels downtown.
So were you also in charge of the media, radio, TV,
everything.
print? So it kind of explain that so people can understand what went into
Pardon?
to scheduling all that media and figuring out how all that was going to work.
No, we had a guy named Bob Long.
Okay.
I'm amazed I remember some of these names. Anyway, he took care of all that. I didn't. But he reported to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were kind of the quarterback in charge of all the players doing the stuff.
Yeah. I was just trying to keep the train on the track.
Right.
So, and he got elected in the fall. And needless to say, in the course of that, I got to be fairly well known in the city among all of the precinct and vice committee. But you have county chairman of the party, and is elected by the precinct committeeman. So I'd been in touch with all of them repeatedly throughout the summer and fall of '63. John Barton got elected. My friend Andy, who's driving me to work every day.
I want to expand on the fact that you've wanted to be a Democrat. You've served the Democratic Party in a lot of different ways. You've built groups as a Democrat. When you were young, what did you start seeing as the big differences of why you would want to be a Democrat compared to why you would want to be a Republican? What started pulling you in that direction from the beginning? And was it when you were going to law school? Was it like what?
No, it was long before that.
So what were those things that pulled you into wanting to support the Democratic
Well, my
Party?
mother, she worshipped Franklin D. Roosevelt. So that brushes off. And
The views of the party, what gravitated you toward the views of the party?
yeah, well, things happened. I can't remember. I tell you about my dad and getting injured and all that.
Yeah, and workman's comp and them not taking care of him for workman's comp.
Well, you know, there wasn't any aha moment. It's just little things happened. And I grew up in a household where my mother was dominant, so to speak, and she was a Democrat. She loved Franklin D. Roosevelt because my parents had built a house in 1931, the same year I was born, and they lost it to foreclosure the next year, I think. And but Roosevelt got elected in the fall of 1932, and so Federal Housing Administration was created in the first 100 days of the Roosevelt administration, and they were able to get mortgage insurance.
Was that a Democratic initiative?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so there's one. What are some other major initiatives that pulled you into
Well, that
loving
one
what
was
they support?
it.
Okay.
Really. It's the only one I heard. She was also thrilled with the idea of Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, I didn't have much of a choice. I'm a little kid. She's a strong Democrat. Yeah. And the two things that she talked to me about were the Federal Housing Administration and saving the house.
So what do you think are some of the other aspects of why you've wanted to support the Democratic Party over the years? What areas do they cover that you support? What are the major areas that have kind of
Well,
kept
I
you
had
in?
teachers that were Democrats.
Okay.
My government teacher. One girlfriend. There were only two of us in the class.
They were Democrats?
Huh?
Two
Yeah.
Democrats out of all the kids?
Yeah. And she was unusual because she came from the Republican part of town. But she wasn't she was a Democrat. Or she wasn't old enough to vote or anything, but
So this is the house you grew up in Fort Wayne. And what was the street?
Drexel.
On Drexel.
2226 Drexel. And my parents built it in 1931. 32, they moved out. My dad got a job, got laid off, and he got a job in Rome, New York. So we moved to Rome, New York, and lived there for 1 year. I have no recollection of it whatsoever. I was less than 2 years old. And the reason they were able to go back was FHA. And my mother was just devoted because Roosevelt had saved her home.
Right.
She'd never much had a stable home prior to that. And that was a pretty unstable situation in itself.
Right.
So she lived there almost till she died at 97.
97.
Yeah. She was 97 years old. She was actually living with me when she actually died, but she had only been there, I can't recall how long, a few years actually.
So the civil rights movement also was growing strong at that point. Am I correct on that, in the early 60s?
Well, in the 60s, yeah.
So what are some of the other reasons that you love supporting the Democratic Party because of their stances on civil rights, or what are some of the other issues that were very prominent that you might have had a...
Well, I was always pro. Don't know why. I've often wondered about this. Civil rights just seemed right to me, and always did. I mean, I have no idea when I started thinking about it, but when I did, and you don't have big, as I say, aha moments. It's more of a process of accretion of culture. It's really a part of your culture. And I just always was, I was always very pro civil rights.
Was there any other major issues that were coming out at that time that were newer to the political scene that everybody started to debate or not be on the same page of, besides just civil rights, women's rights, just in general, any other things that kind of became prominent?
That time. Mm-hmm. It's a constant development, a constant. You grow one direction or another, mm-hmm. but you're not static.